As we speak, gentlemen, this is the morning after for one side of North London, and for Paris, Saint-Germain. As we know, they beat Tottenham in the Super Cup. However, you may have noticed the goalkeeper that arguably won them the Champions League earlier this year was not between the sticks. It was a new guy. Andy, Lucas Chevalier, did you know about him beforehand?
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's been great for Lille for a couple of years. PSG have had an interest in him for a while now. He's brilliant in the Champions League last season for Lille. There's a feeling that he'll give real competition to Mike Maignan going forward in terms of the French number one job. And so when things became sticky with Donnarumma, they were always going to move on Chevalier. I guess the surprise has been how quickly it all came together. Not in terms of PSG being able to sign Chevalier, because he was always going to agree to it, and they're always going to have, of course, the financial means to pull it off. But as you say, how quickly we got from Donnarumma being widely celebrated as perhaps the best goalkeeper in the world to almost becoming persona non grata in Paris.
Yeah, I think the surprising thing, Lars, was that Chevalier was brought in to be the replacement and kind of had mixed fortunes in the game against Tottenham, but ultimately was the cup winner.
Yeah, I think it was important for him to get a penalty save in the shootout because, of course, on the second goal, he was not very good. I mean, that was just a straight-up error, which, if they'd have then lost it, it becomes a talking point in a way that you don't really want. And he is a very different goalkeeper, and that is the reason I would say that they've made this change, because Donnarumma is a throwback. He's a very tall guy with long arms who's a very good shot stopper, and he's not super comfortable with the ball at his feet and would like to stay on his line most of the time. And I don't think that's what Luis Enrique is looking for. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think it's been on the cards since Luis Enrique arrived that eventually they would move on from Donnarumma. Enrique hasn't been quite as brutal as, say, Pep Guardiola was with Joe Hart back in the day, but it is this kind of thing. It's like you take over a club that has a very good shot stopper, but what you want from your goalkeeper is to be good with your feet and to be a sweeper and all those sort of things. So you know that stylistically that's a change that has to happen. I feel like it was complicated almost by the fact that Donnarumma was as good as he was in the knockout stages of the Champions League. That was obviously very useful for PSG. He got them out of some trouble, but it did mean that making this transition would be more controversial. But I think stylistically, this was completely inevitable. And Luis Enrique has also made this clear that this was 100% his choice, he says.
Yeah, and what a call, Andy. That's a big call, isn't it? If you're taking the Super Cup seriously, big call to replace Donnarumma at that point.
Yeah, I guess. But like we said, as soon as it became clear that they weren't going to be able to get a new Donnarumma contract over the line, and PSG and Donnarumma's people, of course, he's from the Raiola stable, have been talking about this for a while. Now, as we said on OTC a few months back, it's been sort of complicated by the fact that PSG have changed their wage structure since Donnarumma signed in the first place. Now, he signed on a free, which meant I don't really know if you can expect the I'm a free agent contract twice, because clearly there's a lot of benefit to the player when you sign as a free agent, because the club's saving on the transfer fee. And also, PSG players were paid a lot more in basic wages back then when he signed 4 years ago. So they've changed it now post Luis Campos being the de facto sporting director. So players are still obviously paid a very reasonable chunk, but it's more bonus related. Donnarumma didn't seem happy with this. Now, Enzo Raiola, who's his agent, I know Lars is going to take you through some of his interesting comments off the back of this. Obviously, he's a bit peaked about his one of his major clients basically being biffed to all intents and purposes. But he has sort of he's said that Donnarumma made an effort He made an effort to meet PSG halfway. I don't know if halfway is a little bit of an exaggeration, because clearly PSG weren't prepared to go anywhere near that previous wage. But I think Luis Enrique, he's not only been a brilliant coach for PSG, but they've kind of given him this extra power, because he's someone who's happy to act as a shield for the board, really. So, I mean, look, there's plenty to say that it being Luis Enrique's decision 100% is believable, because as Lars said, he is someone, Donnarumma, who is not the perfect Luis Enrique goalkeeper. He wants someone like Chevalier, who's a lot better with the ball at his feet. And how good Donnarumma was in the back half of the Champions League campaign has really sort of obscured that for a lot of people. It shouldn't. I think PSG are making the right decision. I think Luis Enrique is making the right decision. But just like with Kylian Mbappe, going back to last summer and going back to how they dealt with him the season before he left, Luis Enrique is happy to say, yeah, this is all on me. I'm not picking this guy because I don't want to pick this guy. And that's brilliant. I mean, if you've got someone who's not only the best tactician in the world, but is basically prepared to take all the public fire for this decision, I mean, PSG couldn't be more happy with him. No wonder they've given him such a huge level of control. With Donnarumma, I think it's more believable. But on the other hand, I think it's pretty clear that PSG didn't want to live another Mbappe situation. They didn't want Donnarumma to get to the end of his contract next year and just walk for nothing. Like, optically, it's terrible. And of course, in trying to avoid another Mbappe situation, they've basically created another Mbappe situation, because they've basically got a guy who's considered one of the best players in the world, and in the view of the world, kind of treated him quite badly. You know, it seems ungrateful. It seems abrupt. Like I said, I think it's the right decision, but the way that they've done it does seem all a little sudden.
It's worth dwelling on the fact that Enrique actually has the authority to make that call, because I think if you look back on the recent history of PSG, I strongly suspect both like Unai Emery and Mauricio Pochettino and Thomas Tuchel and everyone else who's been through there would have wanted to pick out one or two guys from the squad, even if they were high earners, even if they were big names, and said, actually, I don't want this guy, get rid of him. But they probably weren't able to do that. But this is the kind of authority that, you know, winning the quadruple earns you. Like under Enrique, PSG have attained the status that the Qatari ownership have always wanted. You know, aside from all the fashion stuff and all the celebrities at the Parc des Princes, and you know, finally after all this time and all this money spent, they are acknowledged as the best team in the world right now, and they've not been near that before, and that is through this change of direction that they've been able to do with Luis Campos and with Luis Enrique. And with Luis Enrique, like you say, being the front man for that, taking some of the flack for it, and really like owning this project. And I think that gives Enrique so much more leeway. I think if Unai Emery had said, I don't really like Donnarumma, I want a goalkeeper who does something else, I think Nasser Al Khelaifi would have said, tough. I just don't think it would have gone this way. But I think this is basically Luis Enrique showing that like I actually have the authority to make these decisions now. And I guess from Donnarumma's perspective, he might feel it's harsh, but I think a lot of Milan fans felt it was harsh when he walked out on his childhood club to make more money in Paris as well. So yeah, that's just how these things go sometimes, Gigi. You got to roll with the punches.
Yeah, okay, best team in the world, although the caveat is that Chelsea fans might disagree in terms of club world championships. But from what you're both saying, should we conclude then, from what you're both saying, that Donnarumma wasn't the right fit for Luis Enrique? Are we to conclude then that the salary, his salary, £250,000 a week, that was Donnarumma's salary at PSG, that actually wasn't the sticking point, even though his agent's saying, look, you try to meet them halfway. That wasn't the issue, that even if he had gone and taken a sizable cut in his wages, that he would still not have been the number one.
Yeah, I know. I think that's, first of all, as Andy said earlier, that's a throwback to how PSG was run before, and it's not how they run now, handing out contracts like that. But it's also, as I said, top of the show, he's just stylistically, he's not what Luis Enrique wants in goal. He's a tall, brooding Italian man with very long arms who's a good shot stopper, and that's not, instead you get a slightly more agile, handsome Frenchman who's good with his feet, and it's kind of like it's a stylistic change, is what it is. And I think that's a big deal. I was very tickled, and I'm going to bring this in now, by comments from the agent of Donnarumma, Enzo Raiola, who said, and this is how we get our news now. He told Fabrizio Romano's YouTube channel some things. This is modern media. It's good stuff. He said, he's basically suggested that that they've kind of ostracized Donnarumma, like the fact that he's not even training with the first team. The suggestion from Donnarumma's agent is that that's something they're doing not to put too much pressure on Chevalier. This is what they're saying. The decision, he says, the agent, the decision is senseless. And with hindsight, it was made because they were scared of keeping a goalkeeper like Gigio near someone inexperienced who might suffer that pressure and be damaged by his presence. So this is the spiel now coming from the agent of Donnarumma, that he's just too good. Like, the club doesn't want him anywhere near. You can't have a goalkeeper that good in training. It'll freak out the guy they actually want playing. This is the logic we're going with here.
It's an extraordinary read of the situation, and almost certainly a slightly dishonest one. But I think the interesting thing is that, well, because firstly, if Donnarumma and Chevalier were never meant to be together. If Donnarumma wasn't going, they're not buying Chevalier, are they? I mean, that much is pretty clear. But there are still plenty of questions, I think, to unpick off the back of this. I mean, you know, as Lars said, he was from a different time of PSG, and if we're talking about the comparative power of Luis Enrique compared to his predecessors, you look at Mauricio Pochettino, who, you know, back end of the April, they sign Keylor Navas, who's one of the best goalkeepers in the world, to a new contract. And then, they decide they can get Donnarumma on a free. And it's a massive problem that Pochettino has to sort out and really, really struggles to sort out. So Donnarumma, despite being, I think, in terms of a shot stopper, maybe the best there is in the world, he's always been a weird fit at PSG. Not just now, I think since the very beginning. And the fact that he's the ultimate big game goalkeeper in many ways has kind of made a lot of us sort of skew the logic, really. You know, is he a fit? Who cares? Who cares when he's that good? Well, you need to care, don't you, if you're building a project? And that he's this sort of superstar whose name, almost since the beginning, or ever since he was a 16-year-old making his debut for Milan, his name and his presence has stopped people from really analysing what sort of goalkeeper he is. And the fact that he's proved to be a big game goalkeeper in the Euros, in the Champions League, and for people picking apart Chevalier not covering himself in glory for the second goal in the Super Cup final, well, go back into last season's Champions League game. Angel Correa, Harvey Elliott, pleased to meet you, Gigi Donnarumma, because they did very well out of him in those games against Atletico Madrid and Liverpool. So I think for them to move on from a superstar, I think in terms of the sporting politic of PSG, really, really helps them. I think to get another star out of the way. Of course, we didn't think of him, and no one ever thought of him on the same level as Mbappe, Messi, Neymar. But for them to be totally past that and more into this egalitarian football beauty project, I think is something that's pretty good for them. I suppose the other question is what happens next to Donnarumma, because of course, he's been most closely linked in recent days with a move to Manchester City. They're said to have agreed the parameters of a contract between them. If we're talking about players, goalkeepers playing with their feet, surely Pep Guardiola needs one of those? I don't really see it. Again, is it another miscasting of Donnarumma? And actually, a lot of the clubs that you could say were going to be interested in him, you wonder where the fit is. I mean, obviously, Enzo Raiola has been very clear that no one in Italy can afford him. You've had Galatasaray added to the mix as a possible destination, although more likely is that it ends up, say, Manchester City pick him up and Galatasaray pick up Ederson, for example. But Galatasaray need a goalkeeper who can play with his feet because they play so high up the pitch as well. So wherever he fits, you wonder whether it'll be the right place. And it's really the next step in what is an extraordinary and quite a strange career, actually.
Yeah, I'm maybe even by the time this is published, maybe it's happened and I'll look stupid, but the City thing is so bizarre, and it makes me think. That reads to me like someone trying to be a little bit clever and trying to encourage other people to come forward. You do sometimes get representatives of players who just straight up make up these things to get the player in the news and to make them look like everybody wants them. Because again, the move Luis Enrique is making here is so reminiscent of what Pep Guardiola, when he first came to City, did, basically kicking Joe Hart to the curb, even though he was a great shot stopper still at that point, because he stylistically wasn't a fit. So I don't believe that, but we'll see. What I wanted to just be contrary just towards the end of this, is there a case to be made that Enrique is almost being a little too pure here? Like, of course, I'm on the side of you, Andy, in the sense that I understand that Chevalier makes more sense for the project, for the team Enrique wants to build, and I made that case earlier. But one of the reasons PSG are now respected in the way they weren't before is that they won the Champions League. Like, that was the thing, getting them over the line. And you can't get away from the fact that in the knockouts, he came up huge for them. Like, there were a couple of just match-winning saves there. And so weirdly, the thing that's bought Luis Enrique the internal capital he needs to make this move was in part some of the performances from Donnarumma. Like, there is a slight sort of paradox there, right?
Okay, let's put a pause on that one. It ain't over yet by any stretch of the imagination. But I do want to talk to you about something else. Now, one of the, I suppose, stories of the new season will be for La Liga fans that there will be a fixture, a La Liga fixture overseas, in the way that the NFL have got fixtures, one fixture a year or whatever it is here in the UK. Villarreal and Barcelona are going the other way across the Atlantic to Miami. How has that gone down, Andy, amongst the Spanish football fans?
Well, I think that's quite a nuanced question. Firstly, we have to say that Villarreal's game against Barcelona in December will take place in Miami, subject to UEFA and FIFA sign-off. We believe that that's not a formality, but fairly likely, because FIFA have already talked about, changing the rules or relaxing the rules a little bit, so something like this could happen. And part of the reason for that, of course, is the financial imperative, because the fact is that Barcelona and Villarreal are going to make a lot of money out of this. We understand that Barcelona are standing to make between 5 and 6 million euros for this fixture. Villarreal will make even more because they are giving up their home game. So to cope with the loss of gate receipts, etc., which obviously is not as big for them at home as it would be for Barcelona, even though Barcelona are expected to, in September, go back to a significantly capacity-reduced Camp Nou to start with as the rebuild continues. It's a lot, clearly. Now, in terms of how people in Spain have reacted, define people, I suppose, because if there was ever a country where this is going to happen, well, I guess you could argue Italy, and of course we'll come to the fact that Milan Como might end up being played in Perth, Australia next season, and of course for a quarter of a century, Italy have been playing Super Cup games frequently outside not only of Italy but of Europe. I think if you look at Spain, give or take a couple of teams, there's not such a huge tradition of fans going on the road. Now, you do have exceptions to this, like Betis when they're doing well, for example. But it's not like trying to do this in England, in the Premier League. It's different. It's very different. There are a lot of people, a lot of supporters of both Villarreal and Barcelona who will be put out about it. There are others who will simply not be that bothered, I don't think. The main voice of opposition that we've had so far, Lars, is Real Madrid. And, well, they just wouldn't they? Even though a lot of their financial imperatives are the same as Barcelona's financial imperatives.
Yeah, I'm curious about this because Real Madrid have released a very strongly, sulkily worded letter which is unlike them. You know, they hardly ever complain about stuff. Real Madrid, they usually take these things with a stiff upper lip. Honest to God, like whinge bag FC, that club is turning into. But here's the thing: in this particular case, I do kind of agree with almost every point they make about how this is just a really an extraordinary thing to do. This is undermining the sporting integrity of the competition and all this sort of stuff. Like, it's true. You do with deep down, maybe people will correct me on this. I do wonder if this had been like, if this has been a Florentino Perez idea to make more money, would he be quite, I mean, I feel like they're also a little bit cross that they're not involved with it. No, I mean, maybe this is a long-standing thing that they don't want to play. And anyway, this is the guy who wanted the Super League, right? And he's suddenly very upset about this. I don't buy it. Like, I'm not having it. But I do think fundamentally, even though I think they're being disingenuous and I don't really trust it, I do think what they're saying in their statement in Real Madrid is correct. I do think this is it's kind of waving the white flag in the interest in sort of financial interests, the concept of like competitive balance and fairness. Like, what is football? There is a tug of war going on currently, I think, in the sport. Like, is football a sport, or is it just kind of an infinite content machine that should just kind of produce audiovisual content and should make as much money as possible? And football has always been somewhere in between those two polar opposites. But it definitely feels to me that in the last couple of years, we're making sort of slight moves towards it just being a content generating machine, and taking a game in a league championship where like the most fundamental tenet of leagues is that you play each other home and away. Like, this is what you do. Taking one of those games abroad just so you can make a bit more money just makes me, it's a sign that it is more. It's a step in the direction of commerce and a step away from thinking about what the tournament actually is, for sure.
Yeah, okay, that's an opinion. I wonder what exactly, because I don't quite get it yet from what you've been telling us. What exactly is Real Madrid's objections to their rivals, going and knackering themselves out to cross the Atlantic to play a game?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, Dotun. I think there is some of what Lars was saying, a bit of FOMO, because Real Madrid's whole character is built on internationalization, really. They've made clear for years that the Champions League is more important than La Liga to them. So that they go out and do this as well at some point it wouldn't be a shock to me. It would be a shock to me if they didn't at some point. So maybe it's Barcelona being chosen first. Of course, La Liga have tried to do this before. They've been involved in that. Atletico Madrid have had discussions about it as well. So the fact that it should be La Liga and it should be Barcelona is not a humongous surprise. But I guess in terms of the way that the sport's going, the fact that it's America makes perfect sense. Because we saw at the Club World Cup in particular this summer that it's about getting stuff in the States at the moment. So leading up to the World Cup, of course, which is going to have a huge role in hosting the Club World Cup this summer, there is a feeling that there is a very untapped commercial market, and that is a feeling within football. That isn't a feeling just within Spanish football. But of course, there is huge Latino and Hispanic support for football in the United States. So to get the biggest teams over there, and we're not talking about getting, with all due respect to them, Girona versus Villarreal over there. We're talking about getting one of the big boys over. And that is going to make a big difference. And I think, speaking to a couple of people over there from the American supporters' perspective, and look, I've got to take this on board because completely open here. I've been to NBA Paris, I've been to NBA London. I'd be a complete hypocrite if I said, look, there's no possible justification for this. I understand where the idea is coming from, and that it's obviously it's to meet a commercial need, but I guess from the overseas supporters' perspective as well, and football is so much more internationalized now because people can watch every game from like pretty much anywhere in the world. They feel more involved, they feel more invested. And I guess there are a lot of American fans out there who feel right, we're given these crappy pre-season games where the players aren't in peak condition, where not all of the players turn up. We pay a fortune to get in, and it's not even a proper match. So to have something that is real, I think makes a difference. Now, I guess the question really is not will this happen, because I think it will happen, but what happens next? Because we always look at it as the reason that this is happening is because La Liga and Serie A, when they do it in Australia, they want to catch up financially to the Premier League. But the fact is that if we're talking about a Super League, for example, those competitions don't happen without the Premier League. So the Premier League would still be retaining its financial advantage. So it's just really money, sort of, I guess, robbing Peter to pay Paul, because, we look at Barcelona, who can't, at the time of recording, have not managed to register any of their new signings, including Marcus Rashford, Juan Garcia, the new goalkeeper, to actually play in the opening of La Liga at the weekend. So there's a hand-to-mouth element to it as well. But what I'm really interested in is where it's going next and where football is going next. Because if this is something that's going to happen regularly, and we've seen, is it just about football, and is it about catching up with the Premier League, or is it about other sports? Because I think there's a strong sense of, and we can see it with the show at the Club World Cup final. We can see it with the shows opening of the Champions League, which obviously a lot of European fans hate, and particularly the fans who go to the Champions League finals hate. But that is something that football is very invested in, getting closer to US sports. And actually, I think if we look at elsewhere in Europe as well, so not just looking at NFL and NBA and the way they're creating these closer relationships, bringing the mountain to Muhammad and bringing the live sport to the fans in different locations, in different markets. It's quite interesting to me. If you look at the EuroLeague this year, which is like, I guess, like a European Super League of basketball, I suppose is the equivalent of the Champions League, but basically it's closed. It's got no relegation, and teams are either permanent members or granted licenses for a number of years. The interesting thing to me is if you look at this year's EuroLeague, when that starts in autumn, not only do Valencia and Bologna come in, Dubai Basketball are coming in, who are emphatically non-European. So my question is this just the thin end of the wedge? Not just in terms of teams going over there and playing the odd league games, but are we looking at a bit of an exchange as well? Would it be a massive surprise to you guys if, say, a couple of teams or a guest team from the Saudi Pro League came and played in the Champions League?
That's a good question. Lars, feels like Andy's put that ball on your penalty spot. You going to bang it in?
Well, it would be sad. And we can make comparisons to basketball all we want, but I don't understand why football needs to be looking at a vastly less successful sport globally for inspiration. Like, football is a much more successful entity in terms of participation. Well, participation is hard to judge, but in terms of revenue generation, in terms of interest, it's ludicrous that should be a source of inspiration, really. And since I referenced it earlier, and it's actually reasonably well worded, I do have parts of the Real Madrid statement here, and it's worth reading out. So they say, the integrity of the competition requires that all matches be held under the same conditions for all teams. Unilaterally modifying the regime breaks the equality between contenders, compromises the legitimacy of the results, and sets an unacceptable precedent that opens the door to exceptions based on interest other than strictly sporting, with a clear impact on sporting integrity and the risk of adulteration of the competition. Now, again, I'm not convinced Real Madrid are being completely sincere here, given that they are, of course, the Super League team. But I agree with every word of that. I mean, that is completely true. And it's absolutely all of that is correct. And it's kind of an admission of defeat. We need money now so badly that we don't really care about the sporting side of this anymore. We just want to generate more cash. Now, Andy spoke very eloquently about the potential for growing the market in the US, and I get that. But in the immediate term, I mean, the reporting is that Barcelona will get 5-6 million euros for this. So everything that Barcelona claimed to stand for in terms of tradition, blah, 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 you're throwing all of that into the sea. And what you're getting in return is a tenth of a Dani Olmo. Like, I don't love that as a trade-off. So I just think it's kind of sad that they're even considering this. But it seems to be the direction a lot of things are going. I'm me turning into a very old man, added by the fact that I have a very raspy voice today. But like the YouTubeification of football is not a development I'm enjoying.
Well, there's nothing like a spoonful of sugar to make that medicine go down. And, a spoonful of sugar, I suppose, Andy, in this respect, it is the financial inducement from the Villarreal president, Fernando Roig, who's offered to pay for fans to go over for their match in Miami, if that comes to fruition, or get a 20% discount on their season ticket. Would that suffice to win over the fans of Villarreal at the very least, and any other team that might follow in their footsteps?
Talking of displacement of football, this reminds me of only one thing, and it reminds me of receiving a letter in 2001 from that all Wimbledon season ticket holders got, saying, "Oh yeah, we're moving to Milton Keynes, but it's okay. You'll get 90% off tickets, and you'll get a bus there." And thinking this would convince people is so tone deaf as to be laughable. Now, I guess Fernando Roig is like in a different position to a lot of other La Liga presidents, because Villarreal wouldn't be where they are without him. He has been the major catalyst behind their success. And they're a smaller fan base. So there's not going to be the same sort of worldwide outrage. I guess far fewer people are talking about this than are talking about Real Madrid's statement, which, as Lars said, is laudable in many ways, but spectacularly high-handed coming from their position. But look, I mean, if you're asking, do I think this is something that Fernando Roig can say and know that it's really going to cost him very little and make very little impact, because what they are making out of it is a significant chunk of change for them. If for Barcelona it's the most Barcelona thing ever, just looking down the back of the sofa for pennies really to pay the gas bill, which is essentially what they're doing. For Villarreal, that opportunity to get out there, to expand and pick up an amount of money which is a significantly bigger proportion of their budget is a different question.
Gentlemen, as you know, it's August, and it's time for the Champions League third qualifying round. It's going to be a long road to this final, Lars. Shall we begin by talking about some of the teams who, for the benefit of, the luck of the draw or not, are going to be on a longer journey than other teams who will come in at a later stage? Benfica, Rangers, Fenerbahce, amongst the big names to go through at this round. Do you follow these early stages, and does it have any significance? Can any of these teams make it to the very end?
Well, I think those are two different questions. I think, of course, it has a significance. It has a huge significance for the clubs. I mean, the prestige and money that comes with being in the Champions League is game changing. I would argue for these clubs, these are the most important game of the season. Full stop. And they're arriving in August. We've talked about it before. It's a perversion, but it is what it is, and it has to be that way, I guess, for the Champions League to cast a sufficiently wide net. I was watching this very carefully, very happy. With apologies to JJ, who well, I was about to say apologies to JJ. I don't think we need to apologize, because he predicted this. JJ called that Nice would be a disgrace in this tournament, and they duly obliged, losing 4-0 on aggregate to Benfica. I was particularly happy with the return leg in Lisbon, where we had Norwegian midfielder Fredrik Ausnes scoring the first goal, assisted by Norwegian winger Andreas Schjelderup, and then Norwegian winger Andreas Schjelderup scoring the second goal, assisted by Norwegian midfielder Fredrik Ausnes. So it was a very good day for my boys in Lisbon for that one. Norwegians taking over the Iberian Peninsula. You love to see it.
Yeah, well, enjoy it whilst it lasts. Lars makes a really good point, though, about JJ, our own correspondent Jonathan Johnson, based in Paris, talking about Nice. Some teams arguably shouldn't be in the Champions League draw, Andy, as much as, it's important to see teams where being in the Champions League will have a huge impact on their season. But some teams like Nice, he knew it in advance. What were they doing here?
Well, I think them drawing Benfica was a definite downer, that's for sure, because Benfica really are ready for this sort of level of competition and are going to have an even stronger team by the start of the season that they have at the moment. But even if we say like Nice getting into fourth spot was not great for France, even though they deserved it, they won it by merit. The fact that PSG, Marseille and Monaco got the automatic places is huge for France. That's what they need to improve coefficient, get teams in the Champions League that are actually going to win games. And, teams that are actually going to get in the Champions League proper for a start, actually going to get into the league stage of it. But I think what we've seen with Nice is a bit of a problem that a lot of teams can come up against in this level, in that you said, is it important? And Lars underlined it's really important to those teams. These are games that can shape your entire season at a point of the season that you're not ready for them. You've not finished your transfer window. Your players aren't at peak fitness. And, there's been a lot of talk, of course, today about the fact that PSG have been back in training 1 week before they played Spurs in the Super Cup final. Obviously, that's an extreme example. But Francaise, the coach of Nice, sat there after the game and said, yeah, I'm hoping for 3 new players come the start of the season on Saturday. So he's hoping for a player in each line, basically, and he really needs a midfielder. They've just lost out on Madi Camara, who went to Rennes instead of coming to Nice because they offered him a bit more money. And as we know, Ineos aren't exactly chucking a lot about on the south coast at the moment because it's all going into the Benjamin Šeško fund. But look, I think that Nice are a team that, as you say, are a club who are not really the sort of size where they should be in the Champions League, particularly on this current budget. And they just weren't ready for the moment as well. I guess looking at the other end of it, if we're looking at teams that have really got a lot to lose, it's really interesting seeing Fenerbahce coming back from a difficult position against Feyenoord. Feyenoord, who of course went into the knockouts last season, who've looked really good under Robin van Persie, who won the first leg in Rotterdam, who went a goal up in Istanbul, and you thought, okay, Jose and company are in real trouble here. And then John Duran made his first major contribution, putting them 2-1 up on the stroke of half time. And the way that Fenerbahce have spent, they desperately need to be in this. And, Mourinho did a Mourinho and just brush it off last season when they were actually pretty unlucky to go out to Lille in the third qualifying round and said, oh, well, we're not really a team that expects to be in the Champions League. And, I guess a load of Fenerbahce supporters going, excuse me? I mean, that's quite an interesting introductory statement. But for them, I mean, it's massive. And if you look, Lars, at Benfica, as you were talking about before, and Fenerbahce, there's a lot to gain, and there's a hell of a lot to lose in that playoff tie, isn't there?
No, it can completely wrong foot your season from day one. And I think Mourinho kind of got away with it last year, but that is also partly because of his stature. I think there were a lot of incoming Fenerbahce managers who could have tried to style that out and completely failed. I definitely think, not even the Champions League, even the Europa League. I mean, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer not getting Besiktas into the Europa League is a problem from him already. It's his first full season in charge, and he's on the back foot. Now, these sort of moments really matter, and this isn't typically what we do on this pod, but I actually think it's worth dwelling on the game itself between Fenerbahce and Feyenoord, because this was high drama. I'm sure nobody saw this, but this was an extraordinarily dramatic game and an enjoyable game, even at this early stage of the season, because Feyenoord were 2-1 up after the first leg, and they went 1-0 up here. So they were 3-1 up on aggregate just before halftime. And you're thinking at that point, I mean, this could be terrible for Mourinho. He could be in real trouble here, because I'm not sure you get away with that twice and saying, it shouldn't be in the Champions League anyway. I don't think that would have been received well in Istanbul at this point. Andy, do you think?
No, I mean, he is in some ways, enviable position that they clearly can't afford to sack him, which I think kind of bulletproofs him from this sort of damage. I mean, if they went out to Benfica, I think it's quite a difficult sell. We know Benfica are a big club that are in the Champions League constantly and are big hitters in European competition and have an amazing history, which I'm sure is on Mourinho's list of excuses for after leg 2 in Lisbon, should they not make it. But it's funny, I saw a small little mini article in one of the Portuguese newspapers today saying only one Benfica coach has beaten Jose Mourinho, and that was Jose Antonio Camacho when he was in charge. He thought, well, yeah, but that should be the case. Look at the teams he's coached, like Real Madrid, Chelsea, Man United.
Yeah,
he's coached some absolutely enormous teams, and most of those should be beating Benfica with or without Jose Mourinho. Now, look, they've gone really big in this summer's transfer window. I think the team looks better than it did last season. He's obviously made an effort in conjunction with the board to make it younger as well. But I'm not convinced that there can be many excuses for not getting into the group stage, even though Benfica are a formidable opponent. I respect the Norwegian power, Lars, and I think that they've both invested these teams with we're going to be in the Champions League in mind. So it's really going to cost one of them.
I know we don't really have a soundboard on this pod, but could we clip that? Could we get Andy saying, I respect the Norwegian power, and just kind of insert that where appropriate in future episodes?
I think
it's your new ringtone.
It's a good shout, because you may never hear it again. Do you know the team that's called
unlikely, my friend. This is the guy who lived in Sweden for a while, it always comes out.
I was simply trying to move the conversation on to talk about the Cypriot champions, Paphos FC, because this is one team. I've never seen them play, but I have been to their ground when I was in Cyprus a couple of years ago. Tiny, tiny, tiny ground. And yet you've got this team that they are the PSG of Cyprus. No other team's going to come anywhere. Nicosia FC maybe. But certainly they're over and above, they're punching above their weight in a sense, getting into the Champions League for a tiny little island like Cyprus. But yet they've got all these players, Lars, that, they've got Brazilians in their team. They've even got some Swedes in their team as well. Where, and it's a tiny, tiny, tiny ground. Where are they getting the money from?
Well, I mean, the Cypriot League is funny because the top teams are typically owned by wealthy businessmen, and they can pay wages that are not massive. It's not like the Gulf state massive, but it's more than you'd expect for Cyprus. And it's a nice place to live. And I'm sure there are some favorable tax arrangements as well involved. So you do sometimes attract players you might. So Paphos have on their books one David Luiz in defense. That's where he is. And you might remember Mislav Orsic, who's had some tremendous games for Croatia up front and for Dinamo Zagreb, and less so for Southampton. But there's some recognizable names there. So it's obviously it's always fascinating to see who turns up for these clubs, and not a huge shock to see Paphos go through. To be honest, especially with Dynamo Kyiv, of course, having the kind of challenges they face that Ukrainian teams in general face at the moment. For me, of course, it was also exciting to see, well, exciting is not the right word, but it was intriguing to see Copenhagen beat Malmö by quite so much, by beating them 5-0, because that is kind of, I think we all accept that Copenhagen is kind of the biggest and most powerful club in Scandinavia, but Malmö, because of a couple of Champions League campaigns, have a bit of juice behind them, and Malmö would be one of the teams who really want to challenge that throne and want to reimagine themselves as kind of the Copenhagen of the Swedish league, the Rosenborg of the Swedish league, to become serial champions and to really be challenge Copenhagen's position as the biggest team in Scandinavia. Lost 5-0 to Copenhagen here in the return league, and so that was very much Copenhagen just kind of showing who's still boss in the north.